If I promised that one thing could make all your problems go away, would you believe me? Every worry you've ever had or desire your heart has longed for, given to you at seemingly no cost. Alice is a girl who initially appears to be presented with that question as the newest guest in a hotel that is more cosmic entity than mere manor. I don't know what it was I expected when I first started reading Bibliomania, but what I didn't expect was to be dragged into a personal psychological confrontation, deep religious exploration, along with entering a rabbit hole that seemed so incredibly bizarre, only to realize that I had been down there my entire life. My name is Josh, I'm the host of Beyond Media, and this is what happens when a story consumes its reader. Alice wakes up in room 431 with an infinite void spanning around her. Seemingly unaffected by the strange location and beautiful door in front of her, she approaches it only to be met with what appears to be our series antagonist. Serpent runs this hotel, managing each and every guest that lodges here, and he's been doing this for decades, noting how long it's been since his last guest. Instantly, from his first panel, we get the sense that this creature is far more powerful than anything else we can reasonably imagine in this world. The art is so dynamic and well crafted, with his body twisting, stretching, or looming in dominant, unsteady ways. He is allowed to break free of the paneling, using the confines of the story itself to explain both to us and Alice how this world works. That small stylistic decision gives the art such an incredible layer of depth and gravitas, adding to the Serpent's role as this grand overseer. His entire introduction is unsettling because of this, but maybe even more so strange than the Serpent himself is Alice. While Alice appears and even momentarily behaves like a carefree little girl, it is odd for her reactions in this first chapter to be so lackadaisical. It's unsettling and bizarre enough that the Serpent is so strong that he seems to be free of, or at least unaware of, the confines of the literal story that we're reading, but even stranger that Alice doesn't seem to care. The central plot is provided to us in only the first couple pages of the two meeting. This room Alice is in is her new holding space until the party, a vague, odd celebration that leaves us in anticipation. But while Alice waits, he will grant her wishes, all of them so long as she stays within her room. Whatever her heart desires, it will be given to her. Serpent provides her with bountiful sweets upon seeing she's hungry, but as soon as she's finished, she tries to leave, only for a strange pattern to appear on her hand. Serpent then saves her and explains exactly why she's not allowed to leave the room. See, the manor is always fully booked, but each time there's a new guest, a new room manifests itself. The escape lies beyond room 000, but if one is to leave their own room, they will begin to be devoured by the rot, until it consumes them completely and they die. Serpent insists that Alice just sit tight and enjoy her infinite wishes until room 666 is added and the great party commences. All of the guests who are here will end up attending it, and will never be allowed to leave for all of eternity, with their wishes still being granted on repeat away from the real world. But Alice doesn't want to stay. Upon hearing that she can make it home if she reaches room 000, she begins her quest, though it's considered to be suicide due to the nature of the rot. However, of course, Alice accepts these terms and begins her quest, again, seemingly unworried. Obviously, you've probably caught a lot of these biblical references already: the party, the serpent, and of course the number 666. This series is chock full of them. In fact, the very first page of the story contains a single Bible verse, that being John 10:16. Quote, "I have other sheep too that are not in this sheepfold. I must bring them also, they will listen to my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd." There are very obvious and subtle religious implications across this entire story, and they give the narrative theme this weight and presence that might not exist otherwise. Almost like there's this cosmic level of observation and discussioning happening all at once. The religious undertones and allegorical ideas, of course, aren't just limited to these large things as well, but also through the minor. Almost like two separate conversations are being had at once. But before we even can get to that, we need to leave room 431 and enter room 430. Let me present to you that question at the beginning in a different way. If you were trapped in one of these rooms, what would you wish for? I think most would use it as a way to benefit themselves directly and let go of whatever externally is harming them. Fun, food, happiness, pleasure, things of that nature. But the occupant of room 430 provides a different answer. The guest here has taken the form of a gigantic shogun-like being, sitting atop a throne with other robotic entities, creating much smaller humans identified as sinners and made to confess their sins. The sinner that we see then confesses that he bullied a former classmate into attempting suicide, and when asked why he took his bullying so far, the sinner says because it was fun, causing us to see a small interaction of the bullying itself, and the inevitable execution of the sinner before the throne. While this place initially reads like a sort of hall of judgment, the next sinner brought forth dispels that read immediately. It's then that the serpent explains, quote, "This guest, you see, ever since he came to the manor has been killing the same person over and over again, day after day, year after year, while then possessing of an unquestioning loyalty surrounded by soldiers. The guest of 430 was the victim that was driven to attempted suicide, and now lives out his days unendingly able to take revenge, with the support of everyone he wants, contrasting the brutality and lack of assistance he received in the real world." The continuation of the religious themes is interesting to me though, especially because it presents itself as righteous. It's wrong that this person was treated so horribly, but I also think it's interesting that this isn't a world where he's free from the burden of his own life, but instead a world where he gets to exact revenge over and over, with him in the unquestioned right and his abuser in the irredeemable wrong. But that's the power fantasy, and really a strong way to highlight that running away from external forces and drowning yourself in them are fundamentally made of the same stuff. All of this matters more when we take a look at what Alice was doing before she wound up in the hotel. Across the series, there are 5 small sections following Alice's 5 days leading up to when she checked in. All of these take place in a desolate post-war civilization with destruction rampant, but it is the first glimpse of the outside world that we see outside of the very beginning of the story. It follows Alice finding a book and, after opening it, becoming sucked into the world. This book I find really interesting because it redefines the nature of the hotel. It isn't just a cosmic metaphysical area, but more rather a conceptual one. Each room in the hotel is literally just a page in this book, and the book itself is the serpent who grants the wishes of those who live within the pages. This book, given all its religious symbolism, presents itself, at least initially, like a Bible or some other religious text that is meant to provide peace and answers to those who are drawn to it, both of which happen by being given whatever they please and warping around the undertows of people's uncertainty. But I think what it implies, both for its stand-in as a religious authority and its characters in the story, is actually much grander. In room 285, we meet another person who has been swallowed by the book, a husband and father who used to be a teacher and an expert on ethics and logic, but while he taught those things, his personal family life was devastated, with him being drawn away and obsessed with philosophical ideas that realistically nobody can adhere to. And because of this line between homework and family life, the reality that he wasn't a quote-unquote good man by the metric of his own teaching absolutely destroyed his identity. His wife left him and took their son with her, and he lost himself. The man spiraled into alcoholism for years and eventually blamed time itself for all his misfortune, but now that he's found the book, he lives in a single eternal moment, a dinner with his wife and son where everyone is happy and time never moves forward, a place where he and his family are always the perfect image of what a healthy home looks like. But a situation like this is interesting, because if we infer what we know about the book that Alice found shipwrecked on a beach somewhere, it means that this man, and every other person in every other room, had to seek out the book. And not only that, but they sought it out at their lowest point, or their rock bottom. People turning to God or another higher power at their lowest point is not an uncommon idea. In fact, I'd say a lot of testimonies that are popular that you hear echo some sort of sentiment of finding God in a moment of personal crisis. The hotels or book having this sort of religious connotation echoes a slightly perverted sentiment of that idea. Due to the overwhelming pressure of circumstance or tragedy, every one of these people sought out an escape in the form of the supernatural, something to give their misfortune or mistakes meaning and answer all their questions by twisting the context of the world to fit the narrative. It's not a display of authentic faith or true request from a higher power, but instead a way to absolve someone's mind, a way to valorize and justify suffering or rectify what's lost. Which is why Alice questions the man in 285, asking, quote, "You call this life? You call this living?" Before the serpent clarifies, quote, "If nothing else, he does," before Alice leaves the room. Under that perspective, every other room we see takes on a different connotation. You can start to see and imagine what people struggled from in the real world just by looking over the brief glimpses that we see within these rooms. An entire narrative presents itself just through those questions. Why did they wish for this? What reason did they seek out this book? Are they even aware of what is going to happen to them at this point in their captivity? This sort of religiously coded shield is something we've seen before all the time in real life. Like the Crusades, but also the fundamentals of this sort of things happens all the time, both in movements and on an individual level. The valorization of pain, molding religious ideas to fit a worldview and perspective in order to find peace in an otherwise cruel and evil world. They protect themselves from what otherwise might be events or ideas that is too psychologically devastating. At rock bottom, people search for a savior, and everyone who looks will find. something. Though Alice has made it quite far, Chapter 6 shows off how damaging the rot can be over a prolonged period of time. It is still consuming and eating away at every bit of her flesh, and for the first time, we see a glimpse of what happens when someone gets too close to page 000. Inside of room 268, we see a sprawling series of papers that used to make up the guest here. Unfortunately, he got too close to the entrance, and this is all that remains of him. He's become an identity unraveled by trying to undo what this world has given him and take back what he'd given up. But a small haven is afforded to Alice when she reaches room 255, where an old doctor saves her and temporarily cures her body of the rot. The occupant here represents a sort of obsessive relationship with the book, having studied it since the day he was sucked in, cloning himself and analyzing it day in and day out. And he's discovered the nature of this book. Once all its pages are filled, it will merge into one power and be released upon the world. And that destruction is the party that the serpent speaks of. Another discovery is the fact that the closer you are to page 000, the quicker the rot will take its effect. Exiting room 431 will allow the rot a small hold on someone's body, but leaving room 100 will completely consume them, meaning that Alice should not be able to escape. And yet, upon making it to room 99, after her body is destroyed by the rot, Alice regenerates, shedding off the rot completely and standing as though nothing happened, with a look in her eyes that confirms everything that was suspicious about her earlier. Everything you've seen in this manga up until this point, every odd room or weird eldritch entity, all pale into how abnormal Alice becomes in this moment. The serpent himself is completely dumbfounded, unable to even comprehend and theorize what could have just happened. She continues onward, flesh ripped away, brought to death, only to be reborn pure as she started. She dies over and over and over and over again until she reaches floor 000 and leaves everything behind. While the serpent is initially devastated of the fact that he will need to wait yet longer for his freedom, within a moment a new guest arrives in room 431, and then 432, before suddenly dozens and dozens of rooms fill themselves in a rapid succession. Before he can even process Alice leaving, the 666th guest has officially arrived. Power begins to flood the serpent's body as he begins to devour each and every guest, breaking free of the book and transforming into an eldritch beast desperate to consume everything, and consume it does. But as the serpent stands among its newfound freedom, he realizes there's nobody around, before Alice appears once again. See, Alice was once a princess who was cursed with a sickly body, but blessed with a brilliant mind. The only solace she had in her bedridden life was the pleasure of books. Those let her learn everything and anything, allowed her to live lives she never could. She gathered all the books she could, gluttonous for knowledge, desiring to know all that there could be known. Eventually, she created the book to end all books, and filled it with all the knowledge in the world. She named it the Book of Truth. The princess devoured it, and it devoured her. It was a source of power that transcribes the recordings of all human memory and emotions, sucking them into it and storing within its pages. Its only weakness being humanity's collective innovation that managed to seal the book away. And while sealed, humanity began to remake what the original princess had created. Inferior versions to be sure, but fundamentally similar to the original. And while people slowly pretended to forget what they sealed away, eventually, the Book of Truth, Alice, would be freed once again. The reason that no one is here to greet the Great Serpent is because Alice has already devoured them. Alice is the original Book of Truth, but the serpent is merely one of her copies. Alice then reveals her true form, saying she entered the knockoff book intentionally just to see what lay within inferior versions of her work. If it took the serpent hundreds of years to collect a mere 666 pages, then Alice's page count could be a near infinite in quality. She consumes both the serpent and every single person within him in mere moments, leaving behind an empty and desolate world. The final panel then merely shows a small doll, arms ripped off, before everything cuts to black. Like we've talked about up until this point, there is an immense amount of religious symbolism here, with this final interaction even harkening back to the scripture that started it all. The nature of obsessing over truth and knowledge in and of itself becomes one that creates Alice's own room merely outside of the book. She is all alone in a vast world, able to do whatever she wants, and yet she has no one to share it with. The power that lies in faith, and what makes it applicable and valuable in the first place, is the ability to engage in it with others. All those people in the book falling deeper into an holier entity, yet live estranged from its application in regard to everyone but themselves, is the central fallacy of faith for faith's sake. Does it really matter, any of it, if there's no one else who shares it with you, to serve and love on or share peace with? While these religious questions, answers, and ideas are unequivocally interesting, by the time I finished it, I was left with a sinking feeling that maybe there was something more. The story had conditioned me to observe and engage with this piece of art under that religious commentary and perspective, but by the time I was done, I knew that wasn't all there was left. So I started to do a little digging. It's not possible for you guys to know this, but for each video we put out, a lot of time goes into the script and researching and reading, many times for things that don't even end up in the video. I started by looking into the author and the artist, but couldn't really find anything substantial. But eventually I decided to examine the series name. Bibliomania, or book madness, is an interesting phenomenon where people become obsessed with collecting rare and strange books to the extent of even neglecting other priorities. While it just seemed like a cute word at first, the more I looked into the topic and the more content I consumed on it, the stranger it seemed to be. And slowly I was sucked into a wormhole that led me somewhere I never really would have expected. This video will circle back and still discuss the manga Bibliomania, but from here on out, for a little bit, we need to take a step back, because what we're about to talk about is bigger than just a single series. Back in 1809, a man by the name of Tongus Rongdal Dibben released a satirical book titled Bibliomania. The story of it commentates on the absurdity of collecting books for addiction or rarity's sake, and also it's really important to note that bibliomaniacs are vastly different and not at all related to bibliophiles, who are simply passionate about books and love them. Now, I love books just as much as the next guy. I've written 9, published 2, and a third is on the way, but I do not enjoy reading them as equally I do creating them. A true bibliophile isn't someone who just sees beauty through a story or knowledge, but through the wonderful idea of a book. These are some who actually read the books, retain its words, and apply them in healthy ways. But bibliomaniacs are not like that. The focus for these is not inherently reading, but obsession with the idea of the books. Conditions like these are often to be suggested to be somehow related to hoarding types of addictions, though I couldn't find any reliable sources that outright claim bibliomania to be a medical condition. But even still, there are many psychological undertones. The implication of this type of obsession in the 19th century was often either allegorical or directly representing a kind of moral obsession, similar to how we see it used in the Bibliomania manga. The implications of this are interesting because of the bibliomaniac's connection to things like kleptomania and the lack of the ability to resist a compulsive desire. In an article published in the Journal of the American Academy of Psychiatry and Law by Janet A. Tyke in 2005 regarding the idea of moral insanity, they write, quote, "The moral insanity debate is the most visible sign of an intense Anglo-American cultural struggle to understand and respond to individuals with mental illness who had not deteriorated intellectually and who experienced prolonged periods of partial or total remission of symptoms. Clinical observation has led psychic pioneers, first in France then elsewhere, to expand the traditional definitions of insanity and create a new class of non-intellectual partial insanities. I am not going to try to pronounce this too, I'm sorry, monomania, and such impulse disorders as kleptomania or erotomania, and a related class of mental disorders affecting emotional or volitional capacities rather than reason or intellect." The classification of bibliomania adjacent ideas being labeled as such is interesting again for the story of bibliomania, specifically for Alice. Her backstory relating to the obsession to read, accumulate knowledge, and infinitely learn is strongly tied to these psychological concepts, and is what I imagine to be an extreme instance of bibliomania, the condition in relation to the more medical and psychological ideas that we see presented in Tyke's work. Even when you take a look at the occupants in the book, it's not as though they've lost their ability to think, reason, and process what's around them. In fact, in cases like the Doctor, it seems to be the opposite. Even when you think back to the concept of the Book of Truth and its imitations, it would take one presumably at least a moderate level of activity and mental capacity in order to learn and acquire access to the book in the world that they live in. The thing that drove both Alice and the guests within this hotel toward this fate is a type of insanity, but not an intellectual one. Instead, a sport of morality, or maybe more interestingly, emotion. Going through the manga again, I ignored all the religious and logical layers of the story, trying to identify the more emotional ideas. That was the layer of the story I was most excited to explore and dig into next, because I had the sense it was the true thematic linchpin in the story's ending. And I found it located all the way in room 276. Here, Alice stumbles upon a beautiful woman in a lush, vibrant garden who questions on why Alice wants to leave, claiming that there is nothing in the real world except pain. When Alice tries to speak back, the woman says, quote, "Silence, have you any idea how painful it is to dream of yourself drowning in a bog, fearing death's footsteps every night? That dream haunts me, not within this manor. Here I remain myself, my beauty everlasting." And what I find interesting about this question and the placement of this room is the fact that Alice does know, yet we as the audience would not yet know that. When Alice pushes, asking if anyone would be sad for her being gone, the woman snaps, revealing the true nature of her life in the real world. Quote, "They would never be sad for me. They must have nothing but disdain for me whom they had to keep footing hospital bills for. I could tell, how dare they, how dare they. I might be like this, but I am still alive. This isn't me, I'm more beautiful, healthier. They must be glad I'm gone. That's why I'm here in this manor, remaining truly myself in this manor. In this room, I can live forever." And as Alice leaves, a strange judgmental look appears on her face. This one is more explicit in terms of the emotional aspect of the story, and I think that the fact that both a bibliomaniac and a broken person have the same backstory but distinct applications of that backstory, I think is hinting at a core idea between the more logical and religious layer and this emotional one, and that uniting idea is escapism. If you remove the religious imagery, moral allegory, or even direct scripture, each and every resident we get to engage with participates in a grand escapism, a world where there is no lies, where one's family never breaks from the scaffolding of perfection, or a garden where health and beauty are everlasting. Escapism that is so literal and powerful that these people quite literally seek it out and allow themselves to be consumed by it. In truth, this layer of the story may be obvious in hindsight, and it might have been obvious to you as I was going through the subject matter before, but that's part of the beauty of a story like this. You can go through it more than one time, focusing on something else, and glean something amazing. Escapism as an idea or a concept isn't something new or strange. We, as humans, have been doing it for years at this point, and in a survey I put out a while back, almost all of you to some degree have used it as well. There are a lot of popular games that are directly about escapism overtly or inadvertently. Games like Omori, Deltarune, Numeniki, Off, or anime like Every Isekai Ever, or even in instances of media that aren't about the topic but are easy to lose yourself in, like Minecraft, Stardew Valley, Animal Crossing, or League of Legends Tilt Q. Something that was resounding across a lot of the responses that we got was a question or a vague pondering on what exactly escapism means, and that's a good question. I will spare you all of the research I did on this topic to try to provide a more accurate portrayal as to what I think defines this label, but of course, this is not a science channel or anything like that, so don't take my word for it. Many times when we think of escapism in a vacuum, we think of one of those games, or binge watching a show, but also from the responses we got, a lot of people cite their escapism as what actually helped them in their real world by engaging with media that helped them process what's actually happening. But in strict terms, outcomes like that very likely means you have not engaged in escapism. There's a philosophical concept called bad faith, which is largely a core existential construct. Funny in relation to Bibliomania since we can't seem to avoid religious connotations. A Frenchman by the name of Jean-Paul Sartre uses a waiter as his example. If a waiter is overly crisp with his movements and provides an extra bravado and focus to his actions, then the man overplays his identity as a waiter. In this example, the waiter does not believe that he is a waiter, but rather escapes into the idea that he's a waiter. And because of that fact, he reasonably could escape into any other world or idea that circumvents the fact that he doesn't believe he is one in the real world. True escapism echoes this sort of idea. When you practice it, the media in and of itself cannot remind you or echo anything that is actively applicable in real life. If you have a struggling home life or are working through any sort of trauma, stories that directly reflect those ideas and help you work through them are not escapist, because the art is forcing you to process and grapple with the circumstances in a direct way. Another layer deeper of escapism could be using the grappling of trauma or tragedy as a form of escapism itself. If one continues their engagement with this type of content, just like the waiter, they can perform emotional processing without actually opening themselves up to progress, failure, or potential healing. Many times, those games that we think of as grappling with escapism are not at all escapist. One of the most emotional and beautiful videos that exist on this platform, in my opinion, is a video titled "I Played Omori After Losing My Daughter to Suicide" by the channel Love Yourself 4830. Within it, a grieving father does exactly what the title suggests, using the game Omori to engage with these incomprehensibly heavy ideas and the reality that he is experiencing. It truly is a touching video, raw, authentic, and emotional, but it's because of that the escapist theme and the connotation of white space or anything in that game is only escapist in theme and not escapist in media. media. Even this video fails to be an escapist ideal, as whether consciously or not, the topic of this video has not allowed you to forget what you may be distracting yourself from, if not so far through the topic, then now through naming it explicitly. Every occupant in the hotel and Alice herself are absorbed in this concept on a fundamental level, escape from circumstance either through willing deception of reality or through obsession with externals beyond the tangible present. Whether escapism is explicitly a bad thing or not is debated here or there, but ultimately, under its core, Bibliomania takes a stance that prolonged bouts of it is very bad, and I'd have to agree. There are a few different reasons for this, and what I find most interesting is that while Alice seems to hold this opinion for others, she seems to lack it for herself. Looking back at the interaction she had with the father in 285, she asks, quote, "You call this living?" To which the serpent replied, "If nothing else, he does." And there lies the question for the people who have allowed themselves to be absorbed into this alternate reality. Is that really living? While one is able to make progress in their imagination, within the true escapist landscape, there is nothing for you there. It abdicates all pain and the potential of all joy, progress, and unfortunately, even connection. There's something special about honesty and true authentic connection that simply isn't possible if you live a life outside of the reality of any situation for prolonged periods. You can hide behind anything: religion, media, intelligence, or even the illusion of progress. But without participating in the reality of a situation authentically, it's not possible to build anything truly authentic either. There's nothing for you in that world of avoidance, except for that very avoidance that opens deeper wounds, always threatening to catch you. While little bouts can be amazing for the moment of peace, and for many can even help them survive and maintain their lives, it is ultimately unideal for one's lifestyle. And once again, Alice seems to understand this for other people, but doesn't seem to understand it herself. There's a philosophical concept known as Mary's Room. Within it, a girl named Mary has access to all the information in the world about the color blue, except the ability to actually see the color itself. She reads and studies each page, learning all there is to know about the hue, gradient, and every other color in existence, able to even see those and engage with them physically. After years of studying and learning all there is to know about the color blue, Mary is allowed to leave the room and looks up to the sky. Does she learn anything new? On one axis, there would be nothing left for her to learn. She knows all there could be known. And yet, it would be disingenuous to say that knowing of something and experiencing it are completely different things. One needs to imagine that Mary does learn something, and what that suggests is that knowledge can be non-physical, and because of that, certain types of knowledge and understanding must be relational. There's a relationship between Mary and the color blue now, where there is once only understanding. Infinite knowledge has a limit if it's not applied to the non-physical, to the emotional and the relational. When Alice consumes everything and looks upon a desolate world, she becomes trapped in Mary's room, infinitely able to know, and yet not able to fully understand, folding her escapist nature into actual reality. She has lived her whole life escaping into knowledge, into learning, and into consuming all she can. And now, it's too late. The final panel of his stuffed bear articulates this idea perfectly, approaching it with an obsessive desire to learn and inspection, only to have it picked apart, having learned something physical about this item, only for it to be worthless to her in the future. This sort of idea means a lot to me. Like many of you said in the survey, you've escaped into something for some period, and I have as well. I am naturally a creative person, which I hope comes across in these videos, and there's this ideal of being so far removed from the physical world that you no longer need those fundamental footholds. The great warrior needs no ally, the poet is tortured alone, and the artist is obsessed and absorbed always in their work. There isn't a need for others. Isolation is a perverted holy ideal for the obsessed. But the reality of that kind of thing is that the true beauty of art relies on those fundamental experiences, the things that I let go and performed for the sake of maintaining my own identity. Knowledge, success, pursuit, ambition, and victory really only mean so much if they're disconnected from the grounded and humble need for authentic connection. That is the part that makes any art beautiful. I mean, consumption without connection is just meaningless. It's always hard to end videos like these, because I never want to come off as preachy or anything weird, but I will say, fight to experience outside of Mary's room, and until next time, keep dreaming.